you don't want to be hidebound to your native token having value only because of it being a brand related to a chain.
Hi, it's Shyla from Yellow, and today I'm joined by Hugo from the Flare Network. So can you tell us a bit about Flare?
So Flare is a layer 1 blockchain. I suppose a key fundamental difference between Flare and other blockchains is that we've enshrined data protocols into the network, meaning that we have a pricing system and an events system, i.e. We get data from other blockchains and from Web 2, and every validator on Flare contributes to both of those protocols, and the network does not reach consensus unless it has the majority of validators agreeing that a particular event or a price has happened. And so that's our fundamental difference. And what we've built with that so far has been a system that we call FXRP, which is Flare XRP, really with the goal of building out an end-to-end ecosystem for XRP DeFi. And we've taken on and used business development to get people to develop lending protocols, perps dexes, dexes, CDP protocols, and incubated something called Firelight, which is kind of a novel staking protocol which does DeFi cover for the broader DeFi ecosystem across multiple chains.
Your community is very, you've garnered a lot of the XRP community, and is because the Flare Network is bringing DeFi capabilities to XRP network. Would you explain it in any other way?
I'd say we're bringing DeFi capabilities to XRP, and to later on down the line, to assets issued on XRP Ledger. We can't directly bring DeFi to the XRP Ledger itself. So it's a mild distinction.
So now, even in 2026, we're finding that interoperability isn't quite where we want it to be, and we're still relying on multi-sigs or small validation sets. Do you think that decentralizing external data can be solved? And do you really think that decentralization of off-chain data is even achievable?
So I definitely think it's achievable because I think Flare has broadly achieved it. I think there are categories of data to which decentralization is applicable. For instance, for crypto prices that you're drawing from other networks or exchanges, you can get quite decentralized with that. You can have, as Flare has 100 validators all contributing to our system, the Flare Time Series Oracle. For stock prices, for instance, immediate stock prices, you only have a couple of feeds. Especially there's like one feed from NASDAQ. There's sort of not much point in decentralizing that because you already have a single point of failure anyway. We wanted to be able to have maximal decentralization because that gives you maximal trustlessness when building, a bridge for, say, XRP or Bitcoin or anything that is fundamentally decentralized. So I think to answer your question succinctly, yes, I think it's achievable. Why do I think people are still relying on more centralized sets, even for data that is in categories that could benefit from decentralization? I think it's easy. And I think, engineering is really hard. And, budgets for infrastructure are not that high. They've never been that high, and it's really expensive. And so I think people just go for the path of least resistance, which is a degree of centralization. And I think, Flare is not competing to be a data provider on lots of different chains. That's not our goal, and there's not really enough money in it, frankly. It wouldn't be of benefit to the project were we to try to do that. Our goal has always been to create products that we are comfortable with from a security and decentralization perspective, and that's really where our data protocols have come in. We will have announced that we're launching something called Smart Accounts, which allows an XRP holder to do things on Flare directly by making a transaction on the XRP ledger. So they effectively create an intent on the XRP ledger. And that then feeds through onto Flare through Flare's data protocols. Now, if you want that intent to be executed properly, you have to have a data protocol that is going to observe that, and you have to be comfortable with the security of that data protocol. I would be less comfortable with it being a centralized set. That's kind of the reasoning behind what we're doing.
Okay, great. Thank you for that explanation. And it's exciting to learn about the roadmap basically for what you've got going on with Flare. And the next one, I know that somebody told me that you've got quite a strong background in like LLMs and AI.
Less so LLMs. They came out far after I studied AI. And to be honest with you, I only did a master's.
Okay.
It's, it's not bad, but I have PhDs on our team that have far, far, far more experience in AI than I do. And I've got a working knowledge. I understand how the systems work, but I'm not a genius in it.
Oh, okay. Well, this question is sort of like aimed at...
I suppose I can speak to it because, I do keep up with the industry, and I'm quite interested in building something in AI relatively soon.
Agentic AI they've become a lot more independent, by nature. They executing autonomously. So rather than just having, AI agents suggesting a trade, they're now like executing. So do you think that blockchains should be moving more towards becoming a trust layer for these AI systems?
I know that people are talking about this. I'm not certain I understand what trust layer means at this point. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you're trusting. Are you trusting the LLM? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good start. Yeah. So we already actually have within our Flare AI kit a way for you to verify that you're using a particular LLM, particular version of that LLM, and to verify that no one's tampering with that. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, if you go to a provider of, let's say, an agent for trading or for, any other purpose with regards to how your money is used, you're probably, unless you're you're downloading that LLM, inspecting it and hosting it on your own machine, you're probably using a hosted service, mm-hmm. at which point the owner of that service can change the parameters. I think that's where the issue lies. I think there's a second issue in that I think LLMs are probably, I would say, the lack of precision you get from LLMs can be a little scary when it comes to dealing with money. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's kind of where we would like to go, not with regards to money. There's actually much bigger industries to tackle, like healthcare or law, where precision is really important. And I think that takes a very different direction from what you're seeing with on-chain agents and this kind of stuff. But I think verifiability is not that complex. We already have an operational TE attached to Flare. You can verify that a particular agent is in fact the agent you think you're using. So yeah, I think it's a perfectly good use case.
Do you think that blockchains actually have, right now, the way they work at the moment, do you think they're capable of providing, or they're fast enough and to deliver, at the pace that these AIs agents meaning, like the execution for these real-time use cases of AI?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. Anything meaningful still takes a long processing time from an AI, right?
Yeah.
So it might take you a minute or two to get even a relatively basic answer from something like Grok. So I don't think most chains, perhaps with the the opposite example being Bitcoin, which is probably too slow for mm-hmm. LLMs. But Flare, for instance, is fine. Solana is fine. Ripple's fine. XRP Ledger's fine. These are all fast enough for where we are currently with AI. I'm not sure. I really don't think you would want to be using LLMs in high frequency trading right now. Yeah. I think you have much more robust infrastructure than that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe in the future.
Yeah, I think, I actually see like a value in using blockchains, or at least ledger technology, to improve the things that I find difficult about the idea of using a single LLM to manage my money. We have a whole concept of which we've actually published a small basic paper of something we call consensus learning, which is where you're not trusting one LLM. You may not be trusting any LLMs. You may be using 10 or 15 different types of machine learning algorithm, one of which could be an LLM, or all of which could be an LLM. But I think that's very interesting avenues to pursue.
Flare itself, well, not just Flare, but just generally layer 2s have become the sort of the interaction layer for users. They've become more sort of user-centric, and layer 1s are becoming this sort of settlement layer. Do you think that this will lead to layer 1s becoming sort of less valued or even invisible to users in the future?
I mean, ultimately, I would say at the end point of blockchain, the whatever it is invisible, right? It's a crap experience. So, I think people are worried about it becoming invisible because the token is a brand, and the blockchain is a brand, and people want token price to be good, and so therefore they want the brand to be recognizable.
Yes.
Which is kind of obvious, but I actually think over time, like one of your later questions will deal with it, but the answer I'll give then is I think ultimately you don't want to be hidebound to your native token having value only because of it being a brand related to a chain.
Yes.
You want it to have organic economic value, and that means at some point changing the way the token works, something we're exploring with regards to fees and how native token effectively what its place in the ecosystem is, because we know that transaction fees, essentially unlikely to bring excessive value to the token over the long term.
So we've seen Ethereum L1 fees drop, and we've seen L2 fees virtually go to zero. But while this is great for the users, what we're finding is that it's difficult for infrastructure providers to provide network incentives for their users. So how do you think we can find a workaround without resorting to high token inflation?
So I think, you had a period a while back where Ethereum was neutral on inflation. Well, in fact, I think it had like basically negative inflation, and they were calling it ultrasound money. And that's because the transaction fees were so expensive that they were effectively burning more than they were printing. And that was great for a period, but the transaction fees were high, and the world then found another solution, which was L2s, right? And so the transaction fees were no longer beyond the inflation rate, right? So I don't think transaction fees by themselves are the route to sustainability. And obviously, over the long term, high inflation cannot be a route to sustainability, because the inflation is simply a tax on the rest of the token holders over the long term. And so I think you have to change the way the model works. And I think there's vast amounts of economic activity happening on these chains. And I think that the native token has to accrue value from that economic activity. Some percentage, some very small percentage of economic value from the financial activity that's happening on the chain. I don't think there's another way around it, really. Because you can't have, over the long run, cannot have validators being economically suboptimal.
And we've seen that sort of play out with layer 1s already, with the token prices just being driven up.
Yeah, I mean, I think in XRP you have a very different situation where people run validators either because it benefits their business. So if you look at a wallet like Saman, they run validators and they run huge amounts of infrastructure. But that's because they have a business that is kind of attached to that validator, and being able to validate the network and also have very high quality nodes is of value to Saman. So I think that's a very interesting model. It's not a model that's been replicated successfully anywhere else. And also within the XRP community, you have lots of just enthusiasts who run validators for their own enjoyment.
Yeah.
Even if they're not making money from it, but they're definitely not making money from it. They're spending money on it, but they're contributing to the ecosystem. It's not a model we felt that we could, coming from scratch much later than XRP, that we could replicate. We think that, you know, we're going to have to go a different route to make Flare sustainable.
With the MiCA becoming fully enforceable and the Genius Act shaping a lot of the US markets at the moment, there seems to be a push, a regulatory sort of push for visibility of data flows, cross-border data flows. So how do you think we can balance this verifiability with privacy? And do you think that can actually realistically be achieved?
And I think for assets that traditionally are regulated, I think it was always a fool's errand to believe that this wouldn't happen. So stocks, bonds, all that kind of stuff, right? Always was going to happen. Stablecoins are a different question. I think certainly Europe's become complicated on stablecoins. Do I think that they can continue as is? I think de facto they will, because it's really hard to stop them. Do I think that where they're used by institutions, there will need to be, strong accounting, potentially privacy, and all these kind of things? Absolutely. And I think that, but I think that's desirable. I think, you wish to have stablecoins are centralized anyway. So, why we're not trying to defend some kind of crypto libertarian utopian viewpoint here over an asset that is effectively an issued version of a centralized currency, fiat currency. So I think, whatever rules are imposed is what's necessary. I hope that the rules do not introduce friction that is unnecessary.
Yeah.
Because I think that's bad for the markets, and it's bad for, ultimately it'll be bad for the US dollar.
Yeah, and I think everybody is, agrees with that we welcome regulation as long as it's not, hindering the growth of the technology, but also not adding more confusion.
I hope that, Tether's like pretty much one of the largest bondholders in the, for US debt now, and I hope they don't do something to damage that position, because I was
quite scary.
That would be insane.
Bridges have been like the thorn inside of crypto industry as a whole, and historically have been the most exploited sort of protocols out there. So what we're finding is that native interoperability models are emerging. Do you think that's going to render traditional bridges obsolete? And what do you think, if that is the case, what do you think is going to happen with the capital that's locked into legacy bridge protocols?
I'd love to understand what you mean by native interoperability.
So basically what I mean is, rather than having to go to a third-party bridge, the network consensus can sort of validate the information, the data.
Oh, then Flare is definitely a native interoperability network. Well, the whole point is the data is validated by the chain.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean there aren't risks. There's always risks. You've got risks when you build any kind of protocol and a set of smart contracts that go with it. But yes, I mean, one of the reasons we built the native interoperability, of course, it's not native from the XRP perspective, but from the XRP ledger's perspective, but it's native from Flare's perspective.
Okay.
Meaning we see out, but XRP ledger can't see back.
Right. Okay.
one of the reasons we built that is we thought it was a better model, because we're able to rely on validators who are all contributing to the data and have large amounts at stake. It's much harder to do that as an external third-party service sitting between two chains, and then you end up with centralization. That said, Layer Zero has been extremely successful because they've made the UX and UI of bridging really nice. So they've been unbelievably successful with their OFT model. I don't necessarily see them going away. So I think it's going to be a hybrid. Layer Zero, for instance, cannot attach to XRP Ledger, cannot attach to a non-smart contract chain, has to have smart contracts, otherwise their model doesn't work. So I think for like routings like non-smart contract to smart contract network, there's a lot of value in what Flare does, especially with regards to XRP Ledger. For smart contract chain routings, I think, Layer Zero is pretty hard to sort of to beat at this point. I suppose that's my take on where bridging is.
Okay, and then what do you think will happen if with the capital that's locked in these legacy bridges? If you think that's, do you think that it's going to become more common, this sort of
I think
native?
I think there were a lot of bridges around. I think Layer Zero ate a lot of those. But then I think there's other bridges like Wrapped Bitcoin, which is a centralized bridge, effectively using a custodian. That's still, to my knowledge, the most successful Bitcoin bridge. Pretty much the only major one. I would like to be able to say that Flare will be able to replace Wrapped Bitcoin as a native interoperability protocol, at which point, people would simply redeem Wrapped Bitcoin and create units of FBTC. Some point, although frankly we're pretty focused on XRP for the foreseeable future. So I don't know if there's going to be a sea change. Is I think my take. Were there to be a sea change, I think capital flows relatively easily.
We're seeing financial institutions like JP Morgan set up their own sort of permissionless data networks. How do you think this is going to sort of play out, and do you think it sort of goes against the vision or challenges the vision of unified global liquidity on public infrastructure?
I mean, I think that's happened anyway with all the multiple chains there are, and I think we're further away from having one chain that rules them all than we were a couple of years ago. Because I think Ethereum's stumbled fundamentally. They've stumbled with their L2s and they've stumbled with their L1, and they've let people like Solana come along and take some of their market share, and others. And of course, then there's whole other ecosystems like XRP. So I was never a believer that there would ever be one chain to rule them all and one global pool of non-fragmented liquidity. What I do think is that I think it's a mistake to create a totally permissioned chain where you have to credentialize to use it. Because I think it's just a barrier to entry, and it effectively is just like a different set of rails for the same activity that's already happening. I don't think that's interesting fundamentally. I think there'll be examples of it. I think there'll be examples where JP Morgan trades with their trading partners through their own stack. I think that's logical. If you remember back when consensus was a big thing, there were lots of like permissioned chains in the early days that didn't pan out. I think these ones that are run by people like JP Morgan and maybe entities like Canton, they will end up serving purpose. But I still think the ability for liquidity to flow, unimpeded through public chains provides effectively the use case for this technology. So I think it'll be a hybrid of both.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a more realistic solution, doesn't it?
Like, for instance, Flare is working on compute layer. As part of that compute layer, we're building something called protocol managed wallets. Protocol managed wallets allows a protocol that is built on Flare to control a wallet on another chain, let's say XRP Ledger. Now, XRP Ledger has recently displaced Solana as a bigger RWA chain in terms of the rankings. XRP Ledger does not have the same kind of programmability as either Solana, nor does it have the privacy that Canton offers. So what I'm really excited by, especially with the new escrow feature that has been created on XRP Ledger, is the ability for those RWA assets that are issued on the XRP Ledger to be utilized in Flare's compute layer with privacy and compliance.
Great, thank you for telling us that. So when is that going to be released?
So that's quite a long-term project. I think the first components of that will start being released between mid-year and end of year.
Okay.
So it's not a trivial project.
Yeah, it's a big feat. So look forward to hearing more about that next time we meet, hopefully. And speaking of next time we meet, do you think if we were to chat again in a couple of years' time, do you think that interoperability is still going to be a discussion point, or do you think we would have sort of tackled it and it would be fully embedded to the point where developers aren't explicitly talking about it anymore?
I think it's really hard to imagine there's going to be one standard for interoperability. Sort of never pans out that way.
No.
Maybe with like Swift messaging, they all got the heads of the major banks together in one room and someone bullied them to create a universal standard for bank messaging. It's much harder in, the decentralized world. It's a bit like herding cats. I think there'll be a couple of standards. I'd like Flare to be kind of one of them for tokens like XRP.
Brilliant. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the interview. And thank you so much for your time today and your lovely answers. They were very enlightening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope it was interesting.
It was. Thank you.